And the last point here said the amount of influence you will use to get the other party to make a decision in your best interest. Now, if you're dealing against somebody who really knows what they're doing, they're going to try to influence you to make a decision, aren't they? They're going to try to get you to pay too much for something or more than you should in the marketplace. And you can use the same tools to get somebody else to pay too much or to act faster or to make a decision they shouldn't make. So we're going to talk in detail about that. So the question is, we're talking about strategies and standards, is how far are you willing to push this transaction? You know, what kind of leverage are you willing to use to get somebody to make a deal, even if it's against their best interest? And you can argue this is kind of a judgment call. If somebody's behind in their payments, somebody's got maybe $30,000 equity in their house, but they're behind in their payments, is it in their best interest to take a $5,000 cash offer for their house and get salvage something out of this? Well, you might think so. You know, you might say, you know, $5,000 cash is a lot better than you losing this house in foreclosure, because if you lose the house in foreclosure, it's not just the house that disappears, other things happen, right? If you have a foreclosure on your record, now the amount of interest you're going to pay on all your installment loans is going to go up. You're probably not going to be able to borrow money to buy another house anytime soon. So some bad things are going to happen in your life if you lose a house in foreclosure. That is worth a lot to you, isn't it? What is good credit worth to you? Is that worth a couple $1,000s? You know, what is the ability to buy another house in this market worth to you? Is that worth a few $1,000s? And you talk to them like that. You talk to them, it's more than just price here. And the fact is, probably in the distress market, depends on what the market's doing, if somebody's behind in their payments, most people aren't going to offer them much for their equity, right? Most people are going to make them a very small equity. And if it goes to foreclosure, will it get bid up over their loan balance at the foreclosure sale? No, probably not. So if they have a 70 or an 80% loan and goes to foreclosure, at the foreclosure sale, it'll just sell for the loan balance, won't it? There's not going to be anything that'll come to them out of that sale. So if they're close to a deadline, you know, if they're 30 days away or 15 days away from losing a house at foreclosure, isn't it in their best interest to take some kind of cash offer? They go like this, just so I feel better about this plan. Yeah, it is. It is. You got to make me feel good here. It is in their best. So you can argue, you know, you can use some influence in this particular, by saying some of the things I just said, you can use some influence here to say, look, let's consider your alternatives. If you just stay here and don't sell the house to me and it goes into foreclosure, you will have to move eventually. And it may take a while, but you'll have to move eventually. It's going to damage your credit. You're going to pay more interest for a long time. And so if credit's important to you, you know, if credit is not important to you, if you don't have any loans on car loans or anything else, if that's not important to you, you're not paying interest, maybe this isn't important to you. You know, maybe having credit's no big deal. But if it is a big deal, now's the time to talk about this. You're just maintaining your credit is a big piece of how much it costs you to live, isn't it? If you pay 18% on everything instead of 6%, that has you makes the bankers very happy, but it really eats into your cash flow each month. So you talk about things like that. Yeah.
On that point about leaving just a little bit on the bone with seller financing or even tenants has paid off for me over the long haul, referrals, sending other people, just the last 1% foreclosed a second on a guy and just gave him a little help. And he came back later with all files, surveys, thousands of dollars worth of stuff. The last 1% would have aggravated him. So for a long-term strategy, leaving a little bit is paid off for me.
Yeah. I agree 100% with what Jack said. He said leaving something on the table for the other person. If there's not enough in the deal to leave something on the table for the other person, most of the time you're better off just not making a deal. I mean, if it's that tight and you just can't give the other person anything at all, you're better off just walking away from the deal, because there's a lot of deals out there, aren't there? I mean, if you're buying houses, there's a lot of houses you can buy. If you're renting to tenants, there's a lot of tenants you can rent to. When we give back security deposits, I tell my tenants when I rent to them that we give back 90% of our security deposits 100 cents on the dollar. That's a statistic, isn't it? But I tell them that because I want to motivate them to be in that 90%, don't I? I want them to leave that house so clean that they get their entire deposit back. And when you tell people things like that, it's fun because they write you letters and they said, we have left this house in absolutely perfect condition, you know. Now you've got to check on that, but if they write that letter, they generally do their best to leave it in good condition. And why are they writing you that letter? Because they want all their money back. And that's okay, isn't it? Now I could probably still grab $500 for the deposit and they would just leave mad, wouldn't they? But as Jack points out, if I give them all the deposit back, which I did on this house that somebody just moved out of, and I need to call these people now because we have a question about the house, because I gave them their deposit back and they left the house in nice shape, will they return my call? Sure, they like me. Yeah, I'm not a bad guy, I'm a good guy. So if you leave the transaction so they have the feeling that you're the good guy in the deal, you know, even though you made a good deal, people don't mind if you make a lot of money, right? I won't say everybody, but most people don't mind if you make a lot of money, as long as you do it in the right way, you know, as long as you're fair and nobody else is getting hurt. So if you do business in the right way, I think you can leave something on the table, and as Jack points out, that leads to a lot of repeat business. And the best business you do is repeat business. The best business you do is repeat business because now you have good customers. You don't have to sell them again. And I've had one tenant rent from me 3 different times. They'd rent a house, they'd move out of town, come back, rent another house. I bought one guy's house 3 different times. Every time he went to sell his house, every time he'd go broke, he called me up and said, I need to sell my house again. And he'd sell me his house. But repeat business is good business, right? Because you know the people on the other side. And you can do that business a lot faster. Okay? You feel safer about doing that kind of business than you do other business. We're on page 11, where we're talking about choosing the time to negotiate. You know, most of this is common sense, but have you ever gone into some kind of negotiation where you weren't in good shape? You know, where you were tired, or where you were hungry, or where you were in a hurry? And when you do that, it puts you at a disadvantage, doesn't it? Yes. Puts you at a disadvantage. Now, you just want to think about this because if the negotiation is important, I mean, if there's a lot of money on the table, you're negotiating to buy a building or something where there's, you know, potential to make or lose a lot of money, you want to be in the best shape you can. Okay, so you give some thought to that and get well fed, make sure you're well rested. If you're not feeling well, if things are not going well that day, call it off, reschedule for another time. That's a lot better than going into one where you're not feeling well and you give something away just because you want to get it over with. You know, if you ever go check into a hotel and you're tired and it's the only hotel around, are you likely to make a good deal? No, because they see you coming, right? And you're tired, and it's the only hotel around, you're going to pay a retail price. But if you show up at that same hotel in the middle of the day, and you're fresh, and you have lots of options, because there's a bunch of hotels around, now you're much more likely to make a good deal. So being fresh, having more time, not being under time pressure, being well fed. If you're like me, I eat all the time, so eat something. But, you know, because if I'm hungry, I'm going to be in a hurry to move on to that next meal, you know, so I want to make sure I'm not in a hurry. So all that stuff is important. When you can set aside a block of time. It's really important that you don't put yourself under time pressure. Because most of us are kind of type A's, control freaks, you know, and if we have another place we're supposed to be, it'll start working on us. You know, we start running late to that next place, we'll worry about it, and that puts you under pressure. So it's just common sense, but set aside a block of time. When I negotiate with a tenant, when I rent a house to somebody, like I did yesterday, I set aside an hour. Now, I hardly ever use an hour. Generally, I get them in and out of there in a lot less than an hour. But I will slow that down because I can learn a lot about the tenant in a period of time talking to them. What will the tenant try to do? This young lady had a 1-year-old in her lap. What's she going to try to do? Move this along, right? She wants to move this along. Well, you know, again, who has the advantage there? I do. You know, everything I wanted, I got yesterday because she wanted to move this along. You know, and nothing wrong with the house. She's getting a good house at a fair price, but there was no negotiation that cost me any money. All came my way. And get there early. Now, you can sit outside, okay? And, you know, if you show up 15 minutes early, you can sit outside and walk in the door 10 minutes late. If you walk in the door 10 minutes late and you're the seller or the buyer, how are they going to feel on the other side? Might make them anxious, right? So you might do that on purpose. But you shouldn't be late. You shouldn't be stuck in traffic and be 10 minutes late getting someplace, because now you'll be anxious and you'll be all wound up, and it'll make you make the bad decisions. So make sure you get there early, and it's up to you whether or not you want to walk in on time. You ever go to an attorney's office and they make you wait? Ever been to an attorney or a doctor's office and they just took you right in? Never, hardly, right? And it's part of that strategy, I think. Part of that strategy, because they know works to their advantage, makes them look important. They're busy, busy, busy people. And we'll talk a little bit about authority here as we go through the class, but it gives them some kind of advantage, doesn't it? Making you wait 5 or 10 minutes before you get there. Now, it doesn't always work that way, does it? Because what happens to you after you wait for a while? You get aggravated and maybe less likely to give something away because you're aggravated. So it can work against you, making somebody wait too. So be careful with that. After you've done your research, so you should never negotiate till you're ready. That means you know what something's worth. You know, a piece of real estate, the important thing is what's it worth? What's the value? What will it rent for? What's it going to take to fix it up? And you need to know the answers to those questions before you enter into negotiations. Because if you learn all that stuff late, you may end up paying too much. Now, the nice thing about real estate, making offers, is you're going to use a written contract, and what will that written contract have in it? A loophole. It'll give you a way to get out if you don't like the property. And the best loophole to have is some kind of inspection clause, that you get to inspect it, and if you don't like what you find, you can walk away from it. So because you can negotiate with a contract, and you can take some shortcuts in the research part, but certainly you want to know whether or not this is the right house for you to buy next. And that's an important question to ask. You know, this may seem kind of basic, but why are you buying houses? And the answer may be you're buying them for cash flow. Well, if you're buying them for cash flow, you have to buy a certain house, don't you? You have to buy a certain house with a certain financing, or it won't have cash flow. So you have to buy the right house. And you have to make the deal with the financing so that it will have cash flow, because what's the primary determinant of whether or not a house will have cash flow? Primary determinant, the loan payment, right? If your loan payment's $2,000 a month on a house instead of $1,000 a month, you're not going to have any cash flow, are you? So the amount of payment you can negotiate or get when you buy a property is very important to you, and you need to have that in your head before you go in. Now, is it possible to make money on a house that has negative cash flow? Yeah, you can buy it way below the market sometimes. I mean, if I go out and buy an empty office building today, what kind of cash flow will it have? Oh, it will be less than zero, won't it? Because taxes, insurance, maintenance, I mean, it will be way less than zero. But can I buy an empty office building cheap? Probably can, or an empty commercial building cheap, you know, and it's all relative, isn't it? But because it has no cash flow, I might get a tremendous discount on the price. So there's two ways you make money in this business, and you should figure out which way is important to you that day, because it does change from day to day, doesn't it? Whether or not you need cash flow, or whether or not you've got some money sitting in a bank and you just want to buy something way below the market, and decide what your strategy is that day. You want to think about the other party's deadline, and you want to choose to negotiate as close to that deadline as possible. You know, I've read a lot of books on negotiation. I've listed a bunch of them here in the book. But one story sticks in my head is about the guy who goes to Japan to negotiate a contract for his employer. And as soon as he gets off the plane, the people said, we want to make sure we can arrange transportation for you to get back on time. So do you have a copy of your boarding pass where you get back on the plane, your ticket to go home? Oh, yeah, he had that. So he gave him a copy of this ticket to go home. What did they know right now? What his deadline was. And so he's there for a whole week, and for a whole week, he says, we didn't negotiate at all. We just had a great time, saw the sights, partied, and when did they start negotiating? In the limo on the way back to the airport, right? And that's a true story. Well, you can just see how they do that, right? I mean, that wasn't an accident, was it? That was set up on purpose. Well, in the real estate business, do people have deadlines? Do people need to move into houses at certain times, or move out of houses at certain times, or close by a certain date? Sure, deadlines all the time. So it's your job to determine the deadline, and then negotiate, and the closer you get to that deadline, the more pressure they're under. You're not under any more pressure. Your pressure is the same, isn't it? But the more pressure they're under as you get closer to that deadline. So if you're going to ask for major concessions, when's the time to ask for the big concession? Right before the deadline, and probably after you've negotiated a lot of smaller things. Okay? And we'll talk about this process of negotiating. But when you negotiate to purchase a property, there's more than one thing you talk about, isn't there? Might be a lot of things you talk about. And if you talk about a lot of these things before the deadline, and you get right up to the deadline, there's only one thing holding us apart. You know, I had a real estate broker's license back in the 70s, and we'd get down to the real estate closing. Is that a deadline? And many times there would just be one thing holding us apart. And what is that one thing for you real estate agents and brokers? We were so close on the price. There's this small gap between what the seller was willing to sell for and what the buyer was willing to pay. And what was that gap? It was the commission. And we get right down to closing over and over again, and they tried to negotiate that commission out of the deal. There was a fellow that wrote a book years ago. His name was Robert Ringer, and the name of the book was Winning Through Intimidation. And in that book, he told a story. He was a real estate broker of how he would overcome that. He would bring his attorney with him to closing. He'd dress up 2 or 3 of his friends in nice-looking suits. Now, they didn't say anything, but they looked important. And they'd bring, you didn't think that was funny, huh? So he'd just bring some dummies along to sit at the table. So he'd come in with his team, his attorney and a whole bunch of other people that looked like they were important. And now he found by having all this team with him, they're less likely to try to negotiate him out of the deal because he was ready to fight. He was ready to fight. Well, that's strategy, isn't it? That's strategy. He had that plan going in. And he recognized that that was the final deadline, that closing date, and he knew that something big was going to happen there, and he knew what it was going to be most of the time. So questions you can ask to determine deadlines. You can say, could we meet right away? Now, what will that tell you? If I'm trying to buy a house from somebody and they've called me up or contacted me somehow and they say, we really need to sell our house, or some agent has told me they really need to sell this house, and I say, can you meet in an hour or 2 hours? If they say, sure, we'll make it happen, what does that tell me? They're motivated, right? Okay. Now I can switch the question and test motivation a different way. I can say, can we meet next week or in 2 weeks? And now if they tell me, sure, what does that tell me? There's not much of a deadline, or not in the next week or two anyway, right? So you learn to ask questions to kind of test their time frame and to see if you can't determine early on in the negotiation whether or not there's any pressure. So you can ask people in the real estate business, because one very common thing that happens is people are moving, right? I don't care if they're buying, selling, renting, whatever they're doing, they're moving. So you can ask a question that sounds pretty innocent. When do you need to move? Or when are you going to move? And find out if they've made a plan. What have they done if they're planning on moving on a certain day? What do a lot of people do? They hire movers. They get things lined up. I bought a lady's house one time, and there was an agent involved, there was an attorney involved, and I'll tell you the rest of the story later. But anyway, long story short, she hired the movers to move her stuff, and after she hired those movers, she wasn't changing her mind. She didn't want to renegotiate anything, although other people in the deal did. So once people make that commitment, hire the movers, in their mind, they've moved on, haven't they? They're ready to go to the next place. And so now you're in a very strong position. Of course, you can ask them if they bought or rented another house. That gives you a kind of confirmation of how important this move date is to them. And why are they moving? Sometimes that's a very important question, and people will tell you the whole story. So it's good to ask all those questions. So using time on your friend in the next page here, get the other party invested in terms of time. Get the other party invested in terms of time. Somebody was telling me a story at the break about, I guess it was Rick, we were talking about borrowing money, and about when you get involved with a lender, and you give them your financial statements, you give them your tax returns, you fill out all their paperwork, you pay them fees or whatever it is, and it goes on, and the process is fairly lengthy, isn't it? And what happens oftentimes right before the date that you're going to close that loan? Anybody ever borrow money from an institution? What happens? They change something, don't they? And they get away with it. And why do they get away with it? Why do we're professionals, right? We take courses on negotiation. Yet if we've made an application for this loan, we've gone all the way down this road with this lender and given them all this paperwork and put up with appraisal, all this stuff, and now we get right up to the closing date and they change the interest rate on us, or they change the points, or they change something. Why do we go along with it?
Because they took control.
We have so much invested, okay, and we say to ourselves, we don't want to go through this process again. It's worth something for us not to go through this entire process of all the, and we know that we shouldn't do that, right? We know we shouldn't let them raise the interest rate 0.25% or whatever they do, but they consistently do that. Do you think that may be on purpose because they know that you've gone all the way down this road and you're so invested that you'll do it anyway. You'll do it against your interest. Well, you can get other people to do the same type of thing, can't you? When you're buying a house, Larry already said he spent how many hours? Well, hours and hours with somebody, right? 5 hours. Has anybody ever spent weeks and weeks and weeks or months and months and months buying a house where you go back over and over and go and visit with them? Well, what are you doing when you do that? You're establishing a relationship with them, kind of like Larry did because he wanted to borrow money from them. But the other thing you're doing is you're kind of raising their expectations, aren't you? Because every time you go back and look at a house one more time, ask more questions, they got more time invested with you. And if you're dealing with an agent, what's the agent got in this deal? A ton of time. And it's funny because it really shouldn't make any difference. If you can stand back and look at this logically, the amount of time you have in a deal shouldn't make any difference at all, but it does. And people that have a lot of time invested in you, or in the agent has a lot of time, they want this deal to close, don't they? They'll push harder to get that deal to close, even if the number's wrong, just because there's more time involved. So how do you use this? You get people to invest more time. When I have somebody who wants to sell me a house, and hear that clearly, I'm not out knocking on doors buying houses. I'm looking for people who want to sell me a house. Now, I might be knocking on doors, but I'm looking for somebody who wants to sell a house to me. I'll test them. And one great way to test people is to make them come see you. Because in the house business, when somebody has a house for sale, normally they want you to come see the house, don't they? That's their first ask. Come out and see my house, see if you like it, see if you'll buy it, right? But if you say, look, I've seen a lot of houses, and I'm sure your house is nice, you can tell me, is there anything wrong with your house? Now, is that a pretty good question to ask early on? Yeah, because if they say no, you might want to write that down. Because in your contract, you will write in there, there's nothing wrong with this house. And if there is, they'll fix it before closing. Because that's pretty strong, isn't it? So, but you ask them questions, and then you say, come over and see me. Bring all your papers. I said, bring everything you have that relates to your house. You know, your closing documents where you bought it, your insurance policy, your tax bills, your loan information, all that stuff you have about the house. Just stick it in a big folder or bag or something and bring it over to the office for two reasons. If they will do that, if they'll load all that stuff up in a bag and bring it to my office, what does that tell me? They want to do some business, and not just with somebody, with me. They want to do some business with me. So you must have some credibility with these people. So it's not, you know, that doesn't happen in 10 seconds. You have to talk to them for a while to get this to happen. But if they've been referred to you, if somebody has said to them, call John, he'll buy your house, that's pretty strong, isn't it? It's pretty strong. And if they believe that, and they'll come to my office and they'll load all that stuff up, would that take you some time, some trouble to put all that stuff together? It would. So if they'll do that, now they're invested, and if they'll drive to see me, now they're really invested, aren't they? Okay, because now they're working on am I inconvenienced at all if this deal doesn't work out? Not too much. They came to see me. I said, I don't think this deal's going to work out. They're the one that did all the work, right? I didn't do much at all. So getting the other person invested makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? I just rented a house to a lady, and she wanted to change the paint color, and she wanted to change the flooring in the house. And I said, you know, I don't really want to do that, but if you want to do that, you can. And I said, I've even got a painter you can use and a flooring guy you can use. So I had her use my painter and my flooring guy to make sure it got done right. And she paid to have the house painted and have new flooring put in. Now, that's pretty interesting, isn't it? Is she invested in this house? How long do you think she's planning on staying? She better stay a while to get her investment back, right? But people will do that. And so you want them to get invested in that side. So offer to close quickly, but then negotiate slowly. Now, once you have them on your territory, and we'll talk about how to deal if you don't have an office here, but if you ideally you have some place where you can meet that's both neutral, fairly neutral, and makes you look good. So if you didn't have an office, where else could you meet?
Starbucks.
Well, you could meet at Starbucks or Denny's or some nice restaurant, and that's okay. You know, pick a nice place like Wendy's, you know, where they have good food for 99 cents.
What's wrong with McDonald's?
Nothing wrong with any of these places, but is there a place you could meet that makes you look a little more professional than Starbucks? Maybe somebody's conference room, you know, like a bank conference room or a title company conference room or a lawyer's conference room. And if you can do that, and so look around. If you don't have an office, look around for that kind of place you can meet. Does that make you look like you know what you're doing? It does. Plus, you have resources to other things. You know, if these people actually like you because you do business there, they'll probably let you use their copy machine if you need to make a copy of something. They'll probably notarize something if you need something notarized because these people will have all that stuff. So make friends somewhere where you have either and don't almost almost all these little banks even have conference rooms. So it's not hard to find a conference room, but meet somebody there, and then make sure you have it kind of reserved for a while so that you're not going to get rushed out. But it just makes you look better, and you're in sort of neutral territory. But again, they came to see you, and doesn't have to be far across town. Give the other party a short time to reply to your offer. When I deal through brokers, I really shorten this up because who does a real estate broker represent? Yeah, they're confused about this sometimes. But if they have a listing and they've signed a listing agreement, who's that listing agreement with? The seller. And what does that listing agreement say? So they're going to act as an agent for that seller and try to get the best price for that seller, right? So then that's fair, as long as everybody understands the rules. Nothing wrong with that. So they work for the seller. So if you make an offer on a house and the agent thinks they can get more money out of somebody else, what are they going to do?
Leverage your offer.
They're going to try to use your offer as leverage to get the other person to bid more, aren't they? Okay. Well, that's just part of the game. And what you need to know is that you can shorten up your acceptance time on these offers, and you'll see a real timeline in your book here in a little bit about an offer we made. And we made a number of offers in a very short period of time. And we'd make more than one offer in a day sometimes. So we weren't even giving people a full day. Now, a full day is what the broker wants. Or they want more than that if they can get it, to get an acceptance. But as a buyer, what should you ask for?
That day.
That day, and even shorter than that day. 2 hours, 3 hours, something reasonable. But how long does it take for them to get a hold of the other party? I mean, that's the real question. If they can get a hold of them, if they're in town, they can get a hold of them that same morning, give them till noon to make an acceptance. That will keep them plenty busy just getting a hold of the seller that they have, and they won't have time to go drum up new business, right? Because they will do that, and every once in a while, an unscrupulous agent will sell it to their cousin or something. I made an offer on property here in town one time, and I made a seller financing offer at a good price and on great terms, and the broker about fell out of his chair. Because when I make offers, I like to have, make them directly to the seller, and there's an agent involved, the agent will be there too. So the agent was there, I was there, the seller was there. And the seller said, yeah, I'll do that. That's a great deal. And the broker said, whoa, 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 I want you to think about it for a while. And he called his cousin who bought the property on the same terms. Okay, so still remember that guy's name. I have a special place for him. It cost me a lot of money. I did all the work, and he made profit because he got the commission anyway, but he sold it to a friend of his, not me. Well, that's unethical, but that does happen, doesn't it? It does happen. So the way you protect yourself against that happening, and about the only way you can really protect yourself, is with a really short fuse in your acceptance. Okay? And if you can get in the same room with the seller, if you can get all three of them together, and I do that with brokers. When brokers call me and say they have somebody who needs to sell a house in a hurry, and that's what I tell brokers. I tell brokers a couple things. I say, number one, here's what I buy. So don't bring me duplexes, don't bring me apartment buildings or land deals. I buy houses, 3-bedroom, 2-bath houses, double-car garages. These are the neighborhoods I like. These are the price ranges I like. So at least I sort through a lot of stuff. Because if you just tell some broker you want a good deal, what are they going to bring you? All sorts of stuff, okay? And you'll spend all your time looking at stuff that you don't want. So focus, get them to focus a little bit. And then I try to focus a little more. I said, I like empty houses. If it's not empty, I probably don't want to make an offer on it. And I need people that want to sell and close in a hurry. And I can sell and close in a hurry. I can sell and close in a couple of days. So you want them to focus. So when something fits in that box, when it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in a decent neighborhood, and the people need to sell in 2 days, or the house is empty and the people are anxious to sell, that's the one you want them to bring you. But then I try to get the broker to pick up the seller, if they're here in town, and bring them to my office. Now, is that awkward? Is that a little unusual for the broker to go pick up an owner of a property and bring him to somebody else's office? It is unusual. Okay, it is awkward. It is a little bit uncomfortable. But what do I want here? I want the broker to be invested in this deal with the agent, and I want them to be motivated to put this deal together, and I want to test and see if they trust me. You know, if they won't do that, if they won't come to my office, then there's some negative there. You know, they don't feel like I'm going to do business, or they don't trust me, or something. Jason, would you bring somebody to my office if they had a buyer for one of your properties, and or you had a seller that needed to sell something in a hurry, like the same week? You know where my office is, right? Would you bring them to my office and let me make them an offer? Yes. Yeah. And why would he do that? Because you get paid a commission, right? There's a really good chance that if you bring me the right person, I mean, like a 90% chance, another statistic, that I will make you an offer. Okay? Because I'm going to make an offer on an empty house. Somebody wants to sell a house. If it's in my neighborhood, the right size, I'm going to make an offer on that house. And there's a pretty good chance it will close, because I don't just make wild offers. You know, if somebody has a $200,000 house, I don't offer them $75,000. I make an offer that makes some kind of sense to both parties. And as long as I can figure out how to make some money on the deal, I'll make you an offer. So agents know that. But just think about the logistics. The agent going and picking up or meeting at my office with the seller. That's unusual. It takes some effort, but it's a test, isn't it? It's a test. And if they'll do that and they'll invest that time, that shows me something. It shows me they want to do business. And because they have invested the time, aren't they more likely to do business? Remember, that's how we started this conversation. Somebody invests a lot of time, is more likely to do business with you than if you just go say, hi, I'd like to buy your house. Not enough time invested. We've already talked about getting the biggest concession right before a deadline. When dealing with an agent, if you can figure out when their listing expires, what does that tell you? It tells them what their deadline is, right? Now, if you're negotiating to buy a property and the agent's listing expires, how does that affect the agent? Does the agent still get a commission if I buy? What does it do to the chances of him bringing in another buyer after his listing expires? Is he likely to go solicit an offer from somebody else after his listing expires? Probably not. Probably not. So what it does for me is if the listing expires during our negotiation period, it eliminates my competition. The agent really wants me now, because I'm the only one that he's protected with in his listing agreement. The listing agreement says anybody that he's contacted, making offers with, he gets a commission on that one. But now that his listing agreement is over, new people, he's not protected. He's not protected. They can go directly to the owner. They can buy from the owner now and not pay a commission. So he is much more interested in me buying that house than somebody else at that point. Everybody clear on the point? So you can negotiate beyond the listing period. So if you have a house and the listing expires in 2 weeks, you might want to take your time and make your offer a week and a half from now, and then negotiate right through the end of that listing period, because your position with the agent is getting stronger and stronger. You think it's a true statement that you need the agent on your side in order to close a deal?
Yes.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. The agent's against you, you're not going to get this deal closed. So you want the agent on your team, and not literally on your team because he works for the other side, but you want him pushing this transaction through. Spending more time with the other party improves your chances of making a deal. I think we've covered that. Choosing where to negotiate on the next page. A place where you are comfortable, that's important, right? I like negotiating in my office for a couple reasons. Number one, you come into my office, it looks like we're really in business. We've been there for a long time. We were in our last office 25 years, but our new office, I think, 10 years. So, we're comfortable there. It's a place we can do business. We have everything we need to do business there. And if you're there, I have a pretty good sized desk, and I put people on the other side of the desk, and what does that give me? Space. Gives me some space. Power too, but space. They don't feel intimidated because they're 4 feet away from me. I'm not right in their face or anything. And if it doesn't work out, it's pretty easy. They can leave. No, I'm not going to intimidate them. But because we have an office set up, it looks like we're in business, and that gives me some credibility, doesn't it? So if you have an office, if not, use somebody else's conference room, but it gives you some credibility just because you can afford an office. Now, if you ever go to somebody else's office, and you may do this sometimes, and you find yourself uncomfortable, maybe somebody put you in a short chair, just say, hey, I'm uncomfortable here. Do you mind if we change places? I've done that a couple times. That works pretty well. One of the funnier experiences in my life, we were over in Orlando years ago, and I had my friend Jim Napier with me, and Jack Miller was there too, and we walk into this guy's office. It was an attorney, and the typical attorney's office. He had a big desk, he had chairs across from it, and this guy was real old school. He had a fireplace in his office, and he had his dog sitting in front of the fireplace. So I mean, this guy was an old-time, old-school Orlando attorney, and he got this great big chair, and we all walk in. And before the guy can sit down in his chair, my friend Jim Napier says, "Do you mind if I borrow your phone for a second?" And the guy said, "Well, what are you going to say?" He can't say, "No, you can't borrow my phone." So he said, "Okay." So Jim walks over and he picks up the phone and he sits down in the guy's chair and he dials a number. Okay? I don't know who he called, but the next thing he said was, "I'm going to be on the phone for a while. You just go ahead without me." So we've got this attorney now who is ready to go sit in his great big old chair behind his great big old desk and be important, sort of like the President of the United States or something, right? And he's pacing the room while Jimmy's sitting in his chair on his phone. And that guy made us a deal. And why did he do that? He wanted to get rid of us. He didn't want to see us again, ever. Anybody else sitting in his chair, we had violated his space, we're using his phone. It was all going the wrong way. This is not what he had planned, because he had this thing planned out. It would not go the right way. So it's pretty funny to watch that happen sometimes. And maybe you'll get the opportunity to do something like that sometime. We've covered 2, I think. Number 3, a place that relieves the other party's stress. Sometimes you're dealing with when you're buying from a homeowner that's totally stressed out. The property is just falling down around them, and you need to get them out of there. I don't like negotiating to purchase people's houses in their house. Most of the time they have memories associated with that, and there's some emotional attachment to the house, especially if they're losing the house, they have bad feelings about that. It's much better to get them out of that house into some neutral place. So figure out how to do that. I have bought houses in people's houses. I've gone to their houses and sat around the kitchen table and bought houses from them at that point. But it's generally after they've made the decision to move. They're ready to move. They want to get out of this house. The house is no longer a positive thing to them. It's all negative. So if you can see this an all negative thing, they just need to get rid of it, then going to their house is not a bad thing. Somewhere without interruptions. What causes interruptions all the time in our lives?
Cell phone.
Cell phones. So make sure you turn your cell phone off. What else causes interruptions?
Kids.
If you go to somebody's house, what can cause interruption? Kids. Ever been to somebody else's house? Anybody ever try to buy somebody's house and you're watching television while you're talking to them? I have. That causes interruptions. Okay. People can knock on the door. That causes interruptions. One of the best buyers we ever had, he said the first thing he would do when he was going to buy somebody's house, first thing he would do, he'd pull a sign out of the front yard. Okay, so nobody would knock on the door. He'd walk in the house, he'd take the telephone off the hook so nobody could call, and then he'd walk over and turn off the television set. Well, people are watching this, because he really does this. And they said, this guy's a little strange. But then he sat down and he said, I came to buy your house. I did that so we won't have any interruptions because this is serious business. If you want to sell your house to me today, I will buy your house right now, but we need to sit down and get serious about it. And that set the stage for buying that house, didn't it? And it's a very practical thing to do because if the phone rings or the television set's going or somebody knocks at the front door, that disrupts what's going on, doesn't it? So take a lesson from him. Turn off your cell phone. Don't take a cell phone call when you're in the middle of a negotiation. That's just going to break, if you have something going, it's going to mess it up. So turn off your cell phone. Ask them to turn off their cell phone just for a couple minutes. Tell them this is not going to be a long thing. But if you're really going to make an offer to somebody and work through a bunch of points, you want their total focus.
Was that Jack?
Nope, it wasn't Jack. It was somebody else. I'm sure Jack did that, but that wasn't who I was thinking of. And then number 5, in a comfortable position. So make sure that you're someplace that you don't mind sitting for an hour or two. If you're at their place, it's pretty easy to get up and walk out, isn't it? So if they're at your place, it's a little more challenging. But if you want to end the negotiation and you're in your office or you're in a conference room someplace, how would you end the negotiation? If you're done, stand up. And I always do it very politely. I just stand up and say, well, thank you for coming in. If we can figure out some way to put this together, I'm happy to meet with you again. But obviously, we're not going to do that today. So thanks for coming in. And I stand up. Well, if I stand up, the natural tendency is for them to stand up, right? And then we kind of show them the door. But sometimes they won't stand up. Sometimes they're not done. What's that a sign of? They don't want me. Yeah, they don't want me to call this meeting off. But it's a little bit of a test, isn't it? A little bit of a test. So sometimes that's not a bad technique, just to test how motivated they are if they're kind of not making decisions that you'd like them to make. Negotiating with sellers on page 14. Somebody asked me in the hallway earlier today, we talked about owner financing, they said, now how do you increase your chances of buying a house with owner financing? And Larry was standing there, and we both agree on this. You know, you look for people that have a bunch of equity in their house. Now, if somebody has a free and clear house, aren't they more likely to sell to you with owner financing than if they have a big loan? It just makes sense, right? Because if they have a big loan, they have to do something with the loan. They just can't ignore it. You can try a wraparound mortgage or a lease option, and all those things do work. But if somebody's owned a house for a long period of time, as we mentioned earlier, first thing they probably have bigger profit in it. Because they have a bigger profit, they're easier to deal with, just because there's more room to negotiate. But the second thing is they have more flexibility. So by targeting a certain audience, if you want to buy houses with owner financing, you can increase your success rate just by using some common sense. And I tell people in the class, I said, just think about neighborhoods for a second. Are there some neighborhoods where all the houses will be leveraged? They'll all have big loans on? And where will those neighborhoods be? Probably be newer neighborhoods, right? A lot of young families, a lot of people just bought there the last 2 or 3 or 4 years. And when they bought, they got big loans. They haven't paid them down much. Well, if you go to those neighborhoods to buy houses, you're not going to find many free and clear houses, are you? Now, there may be 1 or 2 in there. You know, somebody probably paid cash, but most of them are going to be leveraged right to the teeth. We had one street that I could take you to that had, I think, 30 or 40 houses on it. They are all sold VA. What kind of down payment do you make on a VA loan? Low, nothing hardly. And they all went into foreclosure. Now, why did they all go into foreclosure? It's not no equity. They were upside down, weren't they? I mean, these people who paid $200,000 for houses are now worth $150 or $125 or something. So they all just left. Now, I guess you could buy after the banks take them back, but that's not the neighborhood you want to go to if you're trying to target houses that you can buy with owner financing. You want to go to the other end of the spectrum. So where would you go? What neighborhood? Think about what neighborhood in your town you would go to find houses where there's a lot of free and clear houses. Where would you go in your town? See if you can come up with a name. Now in my town, I know where I go. You know, I go in a neighborhood that's older, right? It's not going to be a 5-year-old neighborhood. It's probably going to be a 30 or 40 or 50-year-old neighborhood. And hopefully it's well located, you know, close to a lot of things that are good, still good schools and shopping and stuff. And the houses will be older. But is an older house a good investment? Can be. Buy it at the right price if it's been well maintained. In fact, an older house has been well maintained, might be a better house than a brand new house. Would you agree with that? Because they might have built it better 40 or 50 years ago than they build them now. But you want to make sure it's been well maintained and doesn't have issues, asbestos, lead paint, stuff like that that's going to cause you grief going down the road. But now you're targeting a neighborhood, and not every house in that neighborhood would be free and clear, but because a lot of people have lived there for a long time, more of them will be free and clear. And if you do that, you start fine-tuning things a little bit. So I look for, here's a list of things I look for when I buy houses, trying to increase my chances of making a good deal. Increase my chances of being able to negotiate a good deal, because rather than just taking a dart and throw it at a MLS book and hitting a page and say, that's the house I'm going to try to buy, I want to be as strategic as I can. You know, I want to think about which ones make the most sense. So, a house with a vacant house, obviously one of my favorite. An owner distant from the property. So if we have a vacant house and the owner's out of town, that's a plus, isn't it? More likely to do something. An owner with big payments. They're going to be more motivated. Now, if I want to make a deal with owner financing, if I want to make an offer with owner financing, I'd have to look at the balance. Can you have big payments on a small loan? Yeah, you can have a bad loan. And I will tell you, if you look around right now, there's still a lot of bad loans out there. And there may be equity behind a bad loan. I mean, you could have a $150,000 house with a $75,000 loan that has payments of $1,200 a month. Well, that's just the wrong number on $75,000 anymore, isn't it? And what would it cause it to have high payments? What's one thing that causes a loan to have high payments? Short term, high interest, right? short-term and high interest. And there are still people making payments. I mean, I sold a house this year, a couple months ago, and the folks who bought it from me, guys, a real estate broker who bought it from me, paying me 8% interest. Now, is that high or low? Seems a little high. Why is he willing to pay me 8%? Because he can't borrow it anyplace else. He can't get a loan. He can't get a loan. And 8%, is that extraordinarily high? No. I mean, if it was 18%, then I'm hurting the guy, right? But at 8%, still in a range of normal. It's just high normal. And high normal is what I go for when I sell them. So an owner with big payments, an owner with a property that needs repairs. You know, it's funny, but especially people who have lived in a house for a long time, many times just let the house go. They don't make a lot of major repairs. And you know, some of these repairs can be very expensive. So you have to be smart enough to know if you have to put a new roof on, new wiring, new plumbing, what all that's going to cost. But you look at it. But somebody who has a property that needs some kind of work, that's a sign, isn't it? It's a sign that they've kind of given up on this property and they don't want to do the work anymore. An owner with a tenant problem, I like buying houses from investors for a couple reasons. One is, if I buy from an investor, I can almost always get owner financing. Well, 90% of the time. Because an investor doesn't want 50 grand cash. What would they do with 50 grand cash? They don't buy new cars, so they're not going to do that. Okay? What they do, put it in a bank at 1%, doesn't make any sense. Yeah, they pay taxes maybe. So, you know, by giving them $500 a month instead of 50 grand cash, that's better for both of us. Better for both of us. So sellers who are landlords, especially landlords that have a tenant problem, just tired of tenants. You ever wake up in the morning and you're just tired of tenants? You say, maybe just get rid of all this stuff. This is just too much work. Tenants are too much work. But then you have lunch and you take a nap and you wake up in the afternoon, things don't seem to be quite so bad, and you still have the house, right? See? The nice thing about the real estate market is you don't sell them just because you're in a bad mood in the morning, right? Okay? You still have them that afternoon, and you probably still have them 6 weeks later and 6 years later. You still have them because it's a lot harder to sell them than it is to buy them. So because of that, things are much more level in the market. And because of that, there's a lot more opportunity when you're buying. People know it takes a while to sell them. And then an owner with a profit in the property, somebody who's owned it for a while. So I always rank my sellers' motivations on a scale of 1 to 10. Okay? So I look at a seller and I say, okay, where would I put this person on a scale of 1 to 10? 10 being somebody who will write me a check to take the property off their hand. Okay? I mean, they really don't want it. They are tired of this property. They'll walk away from the equity in there. They'll pay me to take it. You don't find many 10s, do you? But a 1 is the other end of the scale. You know, they still live in a house. They're not anxious to sell. They're not going to sell till they get their price. You don't want to make offers to people close to 1. You probably don't even want to make offers to a 5. And I put an example here in the book. I said a 5 is an empty house, but they're current on their payments and the house is in good shape. Now, if you add a little bit to that, if it's an empty house and the people are out of town, or if it's an empty house and the house is owned in the state, if there's an empty house and people have some motivation to get rid of it, they may get a 6 or a 7 and may get my attention. But unless you're, you know, on the top half of that scale, unless you're higher than a 5, so the house has got to be empty, there's got to be some reason you need to sell it, I'm not going to make you an offer. Well, if I fine-tune who I'll make offers to, what does that do to my acceptance rate? Helps it go up, doesn't it? And people ask me how many offers I make to buy a house, and it's a very low number. It may be 2 or 3. But I mean, it's not like 50 or 100. It's a small number because I won't make you an offer unless I'm pretty sure you're going to take it. See, I really do some thinking before I make the offer. So by thinking a little bit like that, you just save yourself a lot of time, don't you? Because you're not making offers to hundreds of people who are unlikely to say yes. You may miss some. You're going to miss some. But is there any shortage of inventory in the world? And if you want to buy real estate, are you going to run out in your lifetime? No, there's a ton of real estate out there, isn't there? So what your job is to be as picky as you can about what you buy, because it's a lot easier to buy it than it is to sell it. Make sure you buy the right stuff. And then be kind of smart about who you make offers to. You look for signs before you make these offers, because now you don't waste time negotiating with somebody that's probably not going to make you a deal anyway. If you're going to negotiate, you want to negotiate with somebody who's likely to make you a deal. So determining the level of your competition there at the bottom of this page. Is the property in a slow selling price range? If it is, does that increase your chances of making a deal? Yeah. I have always tried to buy a little more expensive house than most of my competition. Because I found that moving up just a little bit in the price eliminates some of my competition. So I'm buying in a price range. If you looked at all the sales in your MLS, they break it down by sales and price ranges, don't they? So you can really study what's going on in your market if you'll study this. But let's say, just keep it simple. Let's say houses under $100,000 sell in an average of 60 days. Between 100 and 150, they sell in an average of 90 days. And over 150 to 200, it takes 120 days to sell. Well, if I can just get up a little over 150, it takes longer to sell them, I'm going to eliminate a lot of my competition, because there's fewer people buying there just by definition, and because they're harder to sell, how does that affect my negotiation? If you have something that's hard to sell and I show up and I'm a real buyer, how does that affect you as a seller? You want me to hang around, don't you? You're going to solicit my offer. You're going to try to sell me that house because you see me as one of the few real buyers out there in that price range. So you have to be careful about this. And of course, this is a progressive thing. As you've been investing longer and you have more cash flow, what can you afford to do? You can buy a little better house, can't you? And I say better, I don't mean a bigger house. And make sure you understand this. I don't mean you go buy a 3,000 square foot house for a rental. That doesn't make any sense at all. The size of the house really doesn't change much. What does change a house from a $150,000 house to a $200,000 house if they're both 1,500 square feet? It's the neighborhood. You just buy a little bit better neighborhood. And if you buy a better neighborhood, when you go to rent it, and now it may be a little harder to sell, but when you go to rent it, what happens to you? Anybody own a house in a really nice neighborhood? You think that house rents well? Rents in a hurry. I had 80 calls on one house. I've got a house over here on what they call the west side of the trail. I had 80 calls just from the sign. Okay, everybody wanted that house because it was a neighborhood, and it's a 2-bedroom house. This isn't even one of my favorite houses. A 2-bedroom with a single-car garage. I mean, I don't even like this house, but I like it better now because a lot of people want to rent it, right? And so it works out pretty well. But everybody understand the point? Point is the price range is important. And if you get in the right price range, you eliminate a lot of your competition. So when you show up, the sellers are really happy to see you. Does it need to be improved to be appealing to the market? Common sense stuff, but if it needs new carpet, new paint, smells bad, plumbing's dripping, things you can fix without spending too much money, that'll, again, eliminate some of your competition. Why do the foreclosures and short sales sell so cheap? Most of them. They need work, don't they? They need work. And most people don't want to do that work. Would you agree with that? You know, your average seller, and I don't know if that's 67.8% of the people or what, but your average seller don't want to go in there and have to remodel a house. They want to be able to move into the house as is. So if you have a house, the good news, if you have a house in as-is condition, in good condition, it's fairly easy to sell or rent if you have it priced right, because there's not that many of them in inventory most of the time. Is the asking price above the market? Now, if they're asking more than a house is worth, do they get a lot of offers? They don't get a lot of offers. So are they happy to see you? Yeah. And you shouldn't be mad. You know, when I first started, I'd go out and see somebody's house. They'd call me up, and I'd go out and look at it. And it would say that it was priced right, but you get out there, and it was obviously not priced right. You know, it might be a $150,000 house they're asking $200,000 for. Well, if you're asking $200,000 for a $150,000 house, are you going to get many offers? No. So where most people are not even slowing down, they look at the house and say, oh, not in this neighborhood, I'd never pay that much, I just keep driving. I learned to pull in and stop. And why? There's no competition. Nobody else is going to make an offer on that house. So the overpriced house can be an opportunity. Now, I'm not saying you buy it at the high price, but if you're dealing with somebody who has an ego, who's promised his wife he can get $200,000 for this house, can you pay $200,000 for a $150,000 house if the terms are right? Yes. Sure you can. So you might be able to buy that house and make a heck of a deal on that house where nobody else knows how to buy that house. Has it been on the market for more than 6 months? What's that a sign of? Probably price. Can be condition, can be neighborhood, but mostly it's price. And are there other comparable houses for sale? You know, is this a unique house in the neighborhood? Is it the only house for sale in this whole neighborhood where everybody loves to stay there the rest of their life? If so, that's going to be a harder house to buy. But if there's a bunch of houses for sale, it's going to be a lot easier house to buy. So give a point for each yes answer I say there. On the next page, questions to ask before making an offer. And I'm not going to read this entire list to you. If you ever have taken my class where we go out and buy houses, you remember I gave you a whole list of questions to ask people, and the purpose of that list is to gather information, but the second purpose of that list is to see how long they'll stay on the phone with you, or see how long they'll talk to you. You know, if somebody will answer 50 or 60 questions, is that a sign? You know, they're either lonely or you know, they would like you to come out and see their house and make them an offer. You know, they want to do a little business. So you look for signs like that. Some of them are subtle, but you look for signs like that. But a lot of these questions are important to ask. And again, I won't read them all to you, but some of these questions are hard for them to answer. Hard for them to answer. Why are they selling? You know, it's kind of personal. They really don't want to tell you why they're selling. But they will if you're patient with them and listen. Sometimes they'll give you 2 or 3 reasons. But you're looking for motivation, aren't you? You're looking for motivation. When they need to move, why are they moving? Are your payments current, number 6? Now, is that a hard question for people to answer? Probably is. But people will answer honestly if they want to do business with you. Okay? So they'll answer. You can ask people what they paid for their house, and they'll tell you the real answer if they want to establish some kind of rapport and do business with you. So some part of this is a test. Part of this is a test to see whether or not they will do business with you. But then you want to gather a bunch of information. You want to see how much equity they have in this house, how much debt they have, what their payments are, to see if there's any way that you know of that you can buy this house. Because maybe I can see a way to buy a house that you can't see because I've been doing this for a while. But if you can't figure out how to buy this house, no reason to go negotiate, right? No reason to spend a bunch of time with these people. So before you get to the house, you should be able to put a pencil to a piece of paper and say, here's the offer I'd make, here's how I'd make money, it makes sense with this house. And you can do that without leaving home, just to make sure you have a chance of doing some business. Down at the bottom, we talk about minimum profit. I've covered that before. Ask at least one question that you know the answer to kind of test their ability to tell the truth. Now, what would be an easy one to ask? What'd you pay for it? How long you've owned it? That kind of stuff, you know. Because people sometimes slip up on this issue. I had an offer on a house here a couple weeks ago, and the guy who was the agent involved told me we had a house inspection report just done, deal fell apart, but there was nothing wrong with the house. Well, so that's interesting. So I'd write the contract, you know, subject to inspection, of course, and go out and find that they put an addition on the back of the house without a permit. Okay? The roof was bad in certain areas, and it was full of termites. You would have thought that maybe a home inspector would have picked up at least one of those, right? But no, the home inspector gave him a clean report. He said. Well, people will tell you stories, won't they? So whenever you buy a house, you want to have it inspected, don't you? You want to do it yourself for sure. But you don't want to believe everything they tell you, but it's kind of good to test a few things to see if they can get anything right. Ask short questions and then keep quiet as long as possible, because a short question will lead you to a longer answer. And you might want to question statements you think are wrong by saying something like, you know, do you have, if they say it appraised at 200, do you have a copy of the appraisal? The Smiths down the street sold their house for 200 last week. How do you know that? Did you see the contract? I mean, you know, challenge some of this stuff in a nice way. You can challenge in a nice way, especially when you think they're way off base. Making offers on the next page. You only want to make offers to people who can make decisions, right? So back to the basics, know who owns the house, make sure you know who owns the house, make sure they're all there, because if you make offers to just one of the decision makers, what's going to happen to you? They'll come back with a counteroffer, won't they? I mean, if it's a husband and wife that own it, and I make the husband, anybody here by yourself without a spouse? If I make you an offer and you agree to sell your house to me during this class, can you go home and explain to your spouse what a good deal it is? Probably not, right? And not unless you need to have involvement from both parties. They both have to have input. It's like everything else you do in life. You just can't announce something is going to happen. You can't sell that. It's hard to do that. So you need to get them involved at an early level. And if there's more than one owner, sometimes they're not married. Sometimes they're friends. Sometimes they're relatives, right? You need to have them all involved in the process. Now, the exception to this is an estate situation where you have a personal representative, somebody who can make a decision, even though there's several owners. owners, if you have one person in charge, somebody's got a power of attorney who is a PR, something, then you can negotiate with that one person. But they are the decision maker in that case. Before you make an offer, want to qualify them and see if they're willing to sign a contract today. Are you able or are you willing to sell today? Will you sign a contract today? Do you want to rent the house today? If they're just looking, don't spend a whole bunch of time with them. Ask for more than you expect, especially if this is a situation, as we talked about earlier, where you're negotiating with an institution, with a bank, with an attorney, with somebody who's professional on the other side. You can almost anticipate a counteroffer from most of these people. So you want to ask for more than you expect, simply so you have something to give back. You want to be able to give something back so they can save face. If you hire an attorney to negotiate for you, what do you expect that attorney to do? If you hired an agent to negotiate for you, what do you expect that agent to do? Get a better price, right? So if the first offer comes in, somebody offers you 170, and you expect your agent to do what? Get the price up, make it more. So you have to give them some room to look good, right? Because a lot of this is about ego. A lot of this is about ego, letting the other people look good, feel good about the deal. So give them a little space to negotiate there. If somebody's way overpriced, you've all seen shows like Pawn Stars where the guy says, my favorite expression is, that'll never happen. The guy brings in this antique gun, he thinks he's going to get $3,000 for it, and the guy, oh, that'll never happen, So when somebody is way overpriced, you can just kind of laugh and say, that'll never happen. I bought a house from this lady one time, and she said, I asked her how she came up with her price, and she said, well, this guy came and he made me an offer of this price. And I said, why didn't you take it? And she said, well, he didn't come back. And I said, don't you wish he'd come back? And she said, oh, I sure do. I wish he'd come back. So we knew what price was wrong, didn't we? We knew what price was wrong. The one she wanted to take that you wish she took, and that guy never came back. And interestingly enough, it wasn't a wrong price, but because the guy never came back, she had this feeling that it was too much, So it's funny how that worked out. Down toward the bottom here, halfway down, let them set the price. And isn't that the way it works in a real estate business? Doesn't a seller typically set the price? If you call somebody up who has a house for sale and you say, well, what do you want for your house? And they say, we're not sure, come make us an offer. What's that a sign of?
Not motivated.
Well, they're not motivated, but what else do they know? Do they know whoever mentions the first price sets a limit on that side? So they're trying to get you to mention the first price. Well, you don't want to mention the first price, do you? You want them to mention the first price. So it's kind of funny to watch a couple people dance around each other who know what they're doing sometimes, because nobody wants to give the first number, But in a real estate business, now the flip side of that is, when I have a house for rent, somebody calls me up and says, how much? And I say $1,400 a month. Okay? What does that do? That establishes a price, doesn't it? And depending on what the market's like, people will kind of go yes or no based on that price. Will they negotiate that price? Some people will, but a lot of people will accept that just like they accept a sticker price on their car. If the house seems to be about right, they won't fight that $1,400 because you've established that price to start with and you're willing to defend it. So there's two sides of this. If you can defend a price, when you're selling, if you can defend a price, and how do you defend a price? You have other comparables in the neighborhood. You can show them other houses that have sold for the same amount of money, but they weren't as nice as yours. Same story you've heard from other people. But if you can defend that price, establishing the first price sometimes will give you an advantage. If you don't respond to a price, if somebody establishes a price or sets a price, if you ask them how much do they want for the house, and they say $175,000, and you don't respond to that and just let them talk for a while, what sometimes happens? They'll come off that price a little bit. It's pretty funny to watch, but if you'll just let people talk without responding, you don't make them an offer, you just talk for a while, they may lower their price. They may bid against themselves and lower that price to try to keep you interested. So let people do that. Is that worth a little bit of money to you if they come down from 175 to 170 or 165 just because you let them keep talking for 10 or 15 minutes? So that's certainly worth that investment in your time to let them do that. So if you're new at this, let people talk as long as they'll talk. Make sure you have time to do that. The response to your first offer is typically an indication of what they'll do. If they respond, if they start out at a higher price and you say you couldn't pay that, and they just lower the price on their own, or you make an offer and they move, and we'll show you some examples, the amount of their move certainly is an indication of how flexible they are, right? Somebody drops their price $10,000 in the first counter offer, that shows a lot of flexibility. If they only drop the price $500, it doesn't show them any flexibility at all. And I had one of my buddies come see me one day, and we were in cahoots on a bunch of stuff, and he had a building that was not for sale, and he said, a broker has approached me to try to buy my building. It wasn't for sale. And I said, well, let's all sit down and meet. So the broker shows up at my office, and we all sit down. The broker has this property that he has a client who wants to buy it. So he's getting paid by the buyer, not the seller. And that was good to start with. And I said, he said, I'm going to make you an offer, and we know it's the right price because we had the property appraised. Now, what kind of buyer would have the property appraised? Doesn't that cost money?
Somebody really wants it.
Somebody's interested, right? So I found that interesting that they'd had the property appraised, and it was a big, thick appraisal, like they all are, you know, and he flops it on the desk, and we look at it, and that's very nice. And he had a price on it, and the price was $350,000. And so I said, we'll get back to you. So he left, and we talked about it, and after quite a bit of discussion, determined that if the guy had sold it for $350,000, what's he going to do with the money? Where would he invest it? You know, long conversation, but long story short, he really didn't need to sell this property. He was pretty happy keeping it. And I said, well, you won't sell it for $350,000. What would you sell it for? Would you sell it for $450,000? No. $550,000? No. $650,000? He said, oh yeah, I'd sell it for $650,000. If you had a building that's worth $350,000, wouldn't you sell it for $650,000? So I said, let me work on this guy a little bit. So we went back and forth, and the guy had offered $350,000, and I countered at $650,000. And the guy said, you're nuts. I got the appraisal. I mean, the broker's really hot now, right? Because he can almost see this commission coming in, and now things are going bad, real bad. And John's involved, and the price went from $350,000 to $650,000, and he said, how do you come up with $650,000? I said, that's our number. And so it comes back, and he counters at $450,000. And I said $650,000. And he countered at $550,000. And I said $650,000. And he paid $650,000 for a building that was only worth $350,000.
Oh my gosh. You wanted that?
He wanted the building. And once we figured out he wanted the building, now there may be an oil well under that building and we don't know it, but once we figured out he wanted the building, we knew we were going to win that negotiation, right? And it didn't make any difference what that building was worth, did it? I guess maybe we should have gone for $1 million, but the guy overpaid that much for that building. And the good news is that guy buys me lunch every Tuesday for the rest of my life. Works good.
Was that part of the deal?
No, but that's part of the next deal. There's been more deals. There's been more deals. But you know, once you recognize that the other party really wants to do business, you know, just subtle stuff. I mean, wasn't it a bad idea for him to show me the appraisal to start with? When you think about that, I mean, he's trying to document what it's worth. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but the way I read this, when I saw that appraisal, I said, these people have spent a lot of money already before they even talk to us. You know, they really want this building. So we had a little fun. Yep.
You said you wouldn't sell it for $350,000. And how did you get to $650,000? You lost me there.
Well, let's say it's your building and it's really worth $350,000, okay? And it's rented and it's making you $2,500 a month net income. So there's a lot of ways we get to $350,000, right? We look at the income it produces, reproduction. So I mean, it's really worth $350,000. We can prove it's worth $350,000. And then let's say it's your building at $350,000, and you say, I don't want to sell it for $350,000. It's a building. I like it. It's rented. It makes me money. And so you think through this. If I paid you $450,000, would you sell it? Yeah, it's $100,000, but it's still nice building. It's probably going to go up. It's rented. $550,000.
So he was asking
$650,000. At $650,000, he just snapped. He said, "Sure, I'll sell it for $650,000." And we didn't know we could sell it for $650,000 at that point. But I mean, that was the tipping point where, yeah, I can take $650,000 and go buy something else and make more cash flow, make a better return. We can do something smart with $650,000. Okay, so I mean, there is a point where you take the money. To pay the taxes, take the money. Okay, where were we? Yeah, if they won't respond, you know, when you sit down with people, if they won't counteroffer, if you make an offer to somebody, you need to insist that they make some kind of counteroffer, and I don't care what it is. but I want them to respond some way. And we'll talk more about making counteroffers and negotiating with people who keep making offers here right after lunch. But if you know, that's the end of the deal if they won't make a counteroffer. If somebody has offered you $50,000 below the market, and you come back at market and they won't move, then the deal is pretty much done. But you need to do all this other assessment first. But I always ask me, you told me what you won't do, tell me what you will do. We had a class, I was teaching in Atlanta, and they found a homeowner who was living in California, and they called him in California, and apparently it wasn't too late at night there, it was earlier, and they talked to him for a while, and they couldn't come up with anything over the phone. You know, they asked a whole list of questions, couldn't get them on the other end to do anything, and finally the guy on the other end said, tell you what, let me think about it and call you back with what I would do. Well, that's the kind of response you're looking for. And the guy did. He called him back in about a half an hour. He said, here's how I could sell you my house. Because they wanted to buy it. He wanted to sell it. They didn't have any money. And so he showed them how they could buy it with no money. Well, that's the kind of attitude you're looking for in a seller, somebody who will help you buy their house with whatever you've got to work with. If you're convinced that somebody's going to sell a house to somebody else and make them a good deal, and that's what I'm looking for. In my head, I want to be able to say, these people are going to give this house to somebody. It might as well be me. You know, they're going to make somebody a really good deal because all the signs are there. It's the empty house, been empty for a while, needs work, they're out of town, all this stuff going on. I know I've got the right house and the right people. Now I just got to convince them to do some kind of, make some kind of deal with me. So if I make an offer and they just don't respond to it at all, I'll make a different offer. And it'll be, you'll see in the book, it'll be a whole different kind of offer. I like to make lease option offers on property because it makes people think through them. And a lease option is a very low risk way for me to buy a property because it doesn't require a large down payment. I have to do all the work. You know, I have to do it to work just like I own the house. I have to manage it and take care of it and do all that stuff. But I don't have to make a large financial investment. So I can afford to pay people more when I'm buying a house using a lease option than I can if I'm writing them a check for all cash. So there's a big difference between an all cash price and a term price, isn't there? And if I have to write a check to buy a house and pay all cash, that price is going to be, especially in a market that's not moving, is going to be significantly reduced.
What kind of a term do you get on your lease options, and do you ask for?
5 years. The question is, what kind of term do I get? I look for a minimum of 5. I've been lucky and had longer than 5. Shorter than 5, not enough time to make any money, really. At least 5. Because there's 2 ways you make money in a lease option. Many times you're able to renegotiate the lease option yourself, get an extension, get a lower price, get something. But the other side is you're going to probably either have to refinance that property or sell it to somebody within that period of time. Well, 5 years goes by pretty fast, doesn't it? And in most markets, it may not be enough time for that house either to go up or the credit market could be bad. So you want to give yourself a little room there. And down at the bottom here is they may look smarter than they look. If you find yourself bidding against yourself, they may be better at negotiating than you are. You know, you probably heard this story before, some of you have anyway, but I had a house that I owned with Jim Napier at one time, and Jim and I were having this conversation. He said, you know, I'd like to buy you out of that house. And so we talked for a while, and I said to him, well, would you pay me $10,000? He just looked at me, and didn't say anything. After a while, I couldn't stand it. I said, well, how about $9,000? And Jimmy had learned if he just sat there and didn't say anything, I'd probably just keep on coming down. And then I caught on after a while, and I figured out he had to come up with the next offer. And but I ended up selling him that house because I didn't want it. You know, he owned it. It was one of those houses we owned half and half, and it was up in his town, so it wasn't a house that I really wanted. But if you find yourself doing things that you know are wrong, you know, if you're driving to their office, if you're bidding against yourself, if you feel emotionally involved, you need to back off and say, I'm about to give some money away here, and it probably won't be like $10. You're going to give away $1,000 or more money than that. So just be aware. That's part of what I'm trying to teach you is when to be aware of these things.